What if the most important person in the room is the one nobody sees? In the gilded halls of the 5-star Grand Majestic Hotel, a woman in a $20,000 a night suite is being treated like a trespasser. The staff sees her simple clothes and broken English and writes her off as a problem. They mock her, ignore her, and are one step away from throwing her out. But they have no idea who she truly is, or that the fate of their very hotel rests in her hands. And the only person who understands is the maid, the one cleaning the hallways, who holds a secret that is about to bring this entire charade crashing down. The Grand Majestic Hotel in New York City was a monument to old-world opulence. Its marble floors gleamed under the light of crystal chandeliers, and the air itself seemed to hum with the quiet confidence of generational wealth. It was a place where perception was everything. A worn suitcase, a scuffed shoe, a hesitant accent. These were social tells, swiftly noted and judged by the impeccably dressed staff. So when Mrs. May Lynn arrived, she was an anomaly they couldn't quite place. She didn't arrive in a chauffeured black car, but in a standard yellow taxi. She wore simple, dark grey linen trousers, comfortable-looking loafers, and a loose-fitting silk blouse that hid her figure. Her hair was pulled back in a severe practical bun, and her face, though etched with the fine lines of someone in her late 50s, was bare of makeup. She carried no designer handbag, only a worn leather portfolio, clutched tightly in one hand. At the front desk, a polished young woman named Isabel gave her a practiced yet coolly dismissive smile. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting she was addressing someone who had wandered in off the street. "Reservation." Mrs. Lynn said, her English clipped and heavily accented. "Name Lynn." Isabel's fingers tapped on the keyboard, her expression a careful mask of polite condescension. "I'm not seeing anything under that name. Perhaps it was booked through a third party." Mrs. Lynn shook her head, a flicker of impatience crossing her features. She pulled out her phone and showed Isabel the confirmation email. Isabel's eyes widened almost imperceptibly as she saw the booking, the Imperial Suite. The most expensive suite in the hotel, a sprawling penthouse with a private terrace overlooking Central Park, booked for 2 weeks straight, prepaid. It cost more per night than Isabel made in a month. The polite mask snapped back into place, but the judgment behind it had merely shifted. This wasn't a lost tourist. This was new money, loud and tasteless, who somehow had the cash, but none of the class. "Ah, yes. My apologies, Mrs. Lynn." Isabel said, her voice now syrupy sweet. "Welcome to the Grand Majestic." The hotel manager, Mr. Richard Sterling, a man whose posture was as starched as his collar glided over. He had the sharp, predatory eyes of someone who could assess a guest's net worth by the brand of their watch. Seeing Mrs. Lynn's simple attire, his smile was thin. "Is everything in order, Isabel?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling. Mrs. Lynn is checking into the Imperial Suite." Sterling's gaze swept over Mrs. Lynn from her sensible shoes to her unadorned hands. He saw no signs of wealth, no Cartier, no Hermès, no Patek Philippe. His internal calculus labelled her a problem, a competition winner perhaps, or the mistress of a wealthy man who hadn't bothered to show up with her welcome. He said the word, feeling more like an inspection than a greeting. "I trust your stay will be satisfactory." Once in the suite, Mrs. Lynn's behaviour only confirmed their suspicions. She didn't gasp at the panoramic views or admire the original artwork. Instead, she walked through the rooms with a frown pointing. "Bed," she said to the bellhop. "Wrong direction. Bad energy. Must face east." The bellhop stared, dumbfounded. "And tea," she continued, running a finger over a table. Need yixing pot, water at 85 degrees, not boiling, silver needle tea, loose leaf. She complained that the air was too dry, that the faint scent of lilies from the floral arrangement was disruptive to her focus, and that the desk in the study was made of a wood that felt unsettled. The requests filtered through her limited English, and the staff's growing disdain were translated in the break rooms and back hallways as the bizarre demands of a crazy, uncultured woman who had stumbled into a fortune she didn't know how to handle. She wants us to move a king-sized four-poster bed because of bad energy. Isabel scoffed to a colleague. Can you believe it? And she sent back a $300 bottle of mineral water because she said the molecular structure was bruised. Mr. Sterling heard these reports with a tightening jaw. The reputation of the Grand Majestic was built on catering to the whims of the elite, but this was different. This woman wasn't an eccentric billionaire demanding a bowl of only blue M&Ms. This felt like a deliberate attempt to cause trouble. She was a disruption to the hotel's serene, predictable ecosystem. He decided to keep a close eye on her. For now, he would placate her, but his patience was already wearing thin. Upstairs, in the gilded cage of the imperial suite, Mrs. Lin stood by the vast window, not looking at the view, but inward. Her face was a mask of iron control, but behind her eyes, a storm of anxiety was raging. The biggest deal of her life, the culmination of 3 generations of work, was on the line. And in this place, where she needed perfect focus, everything felt wrong. She felt unseen, unheard, and utterly dangerously misunderstood, while the whispers about the crazy woman in the penthouse circulated among the front-of-house staff. Another world existed in the service corridors and back stairwells of the Grand Majestic. This was the world of the unseen, the people who made the hotel's magic possible, but were trained to be as unobtrusive as the furniture. Among them was Chloe Washington. To the other staff, Chloe was just a maid. Young, quiet, efficient. She was a ghost in a grey uniform, pushing a heavy cart laden with cleaning supplies and fresh linens. She kept her head down, her expression neutral, her presence so subdued that managers like Mr. Sterling barely registered her existence. But behind Chloe's quiet demeanor was a mind that missed nothing. Chloe Washington was not supposed to be a maid. She was a brilliant linguist and a recent graduate of Columbia University with a master's degree in East Asian Studies and International Business. Her Mandarin was not just fluent, it was flawless, nuanced, and academic honed during 2 years of study at Peking University in Beijing on a prestigious scholarship. She could debate Chinese economic policy, quote Tang Dynasty poetry, and navigate the intricate subtleties of business etiquette from Shanghai to Shenzhen. But life had thrown her a devastating curveball. Her mother had been diagnosed with a rare, aggressive illness, and the experimental treatments weren't covered by insurance. The mountain of medical debt had grown with terrifying speed, so Chloe had put her dreams of a high-powered career on hold, taking the first job she could find that offered a steady paycheck and flexible hours to help care for her mum. The irony was not lost on her. She had a degree that could open doors in global boardrooms, but for now her key only opened hotel rooms that needed cleaning. From her unique vantage point, Chloe became the silent observer of the unfolding drama around Mrs. Lin. She heard the mocking chatter from the other staff in the laundry rooms. She complained about the thread count on the towels today, one maid said, rolling her eyes. Said they were too aggressive for her skin. I heard she tried to pay the concierge to find her a water sommelier. Another laughed. Chloe stayed silent, but she didn't laugh. She recognized something the others didn't. Mrs. Lin's requests weren't crazy. They were specific and rooted in a deep cultural tradition. The bed facing east was a principle of feng shui, meant to align with natural energy for better rest and clarity, crucial for someone under immense pressure. The precise temperature for the silver needle tea was to preserve its delicate antioxidant-rich properties. The Yixing clay pot was for brewing the perfect cup, as it absorbs the tea's flavor over time. This wasn't the behavior of new money. It was the quiet ritual of someone from a culture that valued precision harmony and mindfulness. One afternoon, Chloe was tasked with the turn-down service for the imperial suite. She entered the room silently. Mrs. Lin was on the phone, her back to the door. She was speaking rapid, powerful Mandarin, and the tone was completely different from the broken English she used with the staff. This was the voice of a commander, sharp and decisive, issuing orders with an authority that was absolute. Chloe caught phrases about leveraged buyouts, patent portfolios, and hostile takeovers. This was not a woman on a bizarre vacation. This was a titan of industry in the middle of a war. Chloe froze for a second, understanding dawning on her. Mrs. Lin wasn't being difficult for the sake of it. She was trying to create a sanctuary, a small island of control and familiarity in a hostile foreign environment, while navigating a deal of immense complexity. Her broken English wasn't a sign of ignorance, but a tool. It was a shield. By presenting a simplified, almost childlike version of herself, she made people underestimate her. It was a brilliant, if exhausting, strategy. As Chloe quietly replaced the towels, she saw the worn leather portfolio on the desk. It was open, and though she would never pry, she couldn't help but notice the logo on the top of a document, a stylized phoenix rising from flames. It was the emblem of Phoenix Dynamic, a colossal tech conglomerate based in Shanghai, known for its ruthless efficiency and groundbreaking innovations in AI and robotics. They were famous for acquiring Western companies and absorbing their technology. Chloe's blood ran cold. She knew that name. She had studied them written papers on their market strategy. The CEO and chairwoman of Phoenix Dynamic was a legend, a woman known simply as Lin Wei, a private, almost reclusive figure who had inherited a small manufacturing business and built it into a global empire. A woman known for her simple dress and her fierce, uncompromising negotiating style. Mrs. Lin in the imperial suite was Lin Wei. Chloe backed out of the room, her heart pounding. The staff thought they were dealing with a nuisance. They had no idea they were mishandling one of the most powerful businesswomen in the world. And as Chloe pushed her cart down the silent, carpeted hallway, she felt a growing sense of dread. Because at a place like the Grand Majestic, a misunderstanding of this magnitude was bound to lead to a disaster. The next 48 hours saw the Cold War between Mrs. Lin and the hotel staff escalate into a series of frustrating skirmishes. Each incident, small on its own, added another layer to the wall of misunderstanding that was being built around the woman in the imperial suite. It began with breakfast. Mrs. Lin had a standing order, a simple bowl of congee steamed vegetables, and the silver needle tea prepared to her exact specifications. On the third morning, a waiter who had heard the gossip about her being difficult brought up a standard American breakfast, scrambled eggs, bacon and toast with a pot of scalding hot Lipton tea. "No, wrong," Mrs. Lin said, pushing the tray away. The waiter, a young man named Leo, shrugged. "This is what the ticket said, Mum." He didn't offer to fix it. He simply left the tray a passive-aggressive monument to the staff's unwillingness to accommodate her. She ate nothing. Later that day, an important video conference was scheduled with her legal team in Shanghai. She had requested the hotel's IT department to ensure a secure high-speed connection. An hour before the call, the internet in her suite went dead. She called the front desk, her frustration evident in her clipped English. "Internet, no work. Need now." Isabel answered the call, her voice dripping with false concern. "We'll send someone up as soon as they're available, madam. They're quite busy at the moment. Important. Now?" Mrs. Lin insisted. An hour passed, then 2. The IT technician finally arrived 3 hours late, long after the crucial meeting time had passed. He spent 5 minutes fiddling with the router and declared it fixed. The call had been missed. The delay had cost her team in Shanghai an entire business day, a critical loss in a time-sensitive negotiation. Mrs. Lin's composure began to fray. She wasn't just being inconvenienced, she was being actively sabotaged by the staff's incompetence and dismissiveness. The ultimate architect of this dismissiveness was Mr. Sterling. He had been receiving a steady stream of complaints about Mrs. Lin, which only reinforced his initial judgment. He saw her not as a guest to be served, but as a blemish on his hotel's pristine reputation. He felt her presence was an affront to the real clientele, the quiet, elegantly dressed billionaires who never complained because they never had to. He decided it was time to assert his authority. He rode the private elevator up to the Imperial Suite and knocked sharply on the door. When Mrs. Lin answered, he didn't wait to be invited in. He stepped inside, his eyes sweeping across the room with disdain. He noted the furniture she had attempted to rearrange and the untouched tray of American breakfast, now cold and congealing. "Mrs. Lin," he began, his voice low and firm. "We have a certain standard of conduct at the Grand Majestic. Our staff are here to provide excellent service, but they are not here to be harassed with incessant nonsensical demands." Mrs. Lin stared at him, her expression unreadable. "My demands are not nonsensical. Moving furniture for energy, rejecting food and water for reasons no one can comprehend." Sterling scoffed lightly. "This is a 5-star hotel, not a wellness retreat for the newly eccentric. We have received numerous complaints. Your behavior is disruptive to our staff and to the general atmosphere of tranquility we cultivate." His words were carefully chosen, each one a polished stone of condescension. He was speaking to her as one might speak to a child having a tantrum. "If you are unable to conduct yourself in a manner befitting a guest of the Grand Majestic," he continued, his voice hardening, "I will have to ask you to find alternative accommodations. We have a reputation to maintain." It was a clear, unambiguous threat. Behave or get out. Mrs. Lin's hands, hidden at her sides, clenched into tight fists. For a moment, a flicker of pure, unadulterated fury flashed in her eyes. It was the look of a predator being poked with a stick by a fool who didn't realize the cage door was unlocked. But just as quickly as it appeared, it vanished, replaced by a mask of cold weariness. She gave a single sharp nod. "I understand." Sterling took this as a victory. He had put the troublesome woman in her place. He gave a smug, self-satisfied smile, turned on his heel, and left the door clicking shut behind him. Alone in the vast, silent suite, Mrs. Lin walked to the window. The pressure of the deal was immense, the stakes astronomical. She was trying to acquire a legacy American robotics firm, Kinetic Dynamics, a move that would solidify her company's global dominance for the next 50 years. But the negotiations were fraught with cultural clashes and political hurdles. She needed to be a fortress of calm and strength. Instead, this hotel, this place that was supposed to be her command center, had become enemy territory. The constant microaggressions, the dismissal, the utter lack of respect. It was like being pecked to death by ducks. It was a distraction she could not afford. Mr. Sterling's threat wasn't just an insult, it was a genuine danger. If she were forced to leave, it would disrupt the final critical phase of the negotiations scheduled to happen right here in this city. For the first time in a long time, the formidable Lin Wei felt a tremor of doubt. She was isolated, exhausted, and surrounded by people who saw her as nothing. And the worst part was yet to come. The deal was entering its final, most delicate stage. The culmination of months of aggressive negotiation hinged on a set of proprietary schematics and confidential financial audits. These were not documents that could be trusted to email or a cloud server. They were physical papers delivered by a bonded courier directly from her headquarters in Shanghai. The package represented the heart of her leverage. Its arrival was the signal for the final meeting with the sellers of Kinetic Dynamics. Mrs. Lin had been tracking the package obsessively. According to the courier service, it had been signed for and delivered to the Grand Majestic's front desk at 9:15 a.m. She had waited all morning, but by 2 p.m. it still hadn't been brought to her suite. Her first call to the front desk was met with polite indifference by Isabel. "I'll look into it, Mrs. Lin," she had said, her tone implying it was hardly a priority. An hour later, with still no sign of the package, Mrs. Lin called again. This time her voice was tight with urgency. "Package, from Shanghai. Very important. Where is it?" "Ma'am, as I said, I'm looking into it," Isabel replied, a note of irritation creeping in. "We process hundreds of deliveries a day. It will be brought up when it is sorted." By 4:00 p.m., a cold knot of dread was tightening in Mrs. Lin's stomach. Her final meeting with the acquisition targets was scheduled for the next morning. Without those documents, her position would be catastrophically weakened. She went down to the lobby in person, a rare move that signaled her rising panic. She approached the concierge desk where Isabel and another clerk were chatting. She waited, but they made a point of ignoring her for a full minute before Isabel finally looked up. "Yes." "My package." Mrs. Lin said, her voice strained. "From courier, this morning. I need it now." Isabel sighed dramatically and tapped at her computer. "I see a note here. A package did arrive for you, but it was damaged in transit. It was leaking some kind of brown powder, so for safety reasons our security team had to dispose of it." The world seemed to tilt under Mrs. Lin's feet. "Dispose?" The word came out as a strangled whisper. "No, not possible." "Hotel policy, ma'am," the other clerk chimed in smugly. "Suspicious packages are handled by protocol. We can't take any risks." "It was tea," Mrs. Lin managed to say, her mind reeling. She knew her assistant had packed a small sealed tin of her favorite rare Da Hong Pao tea alongside the documents as a personal comfort. The tin must have broken. "It was just tea." Isabel gave a small, disbelieving smirk. "Tea, of course. Well, I'm sorry for your inconvenience, but it's gone." She turned back to her colleague, dismissing Mrs. Lin as if she were no longer there. For a moment, Mrs. Lin couldn't breathe. The casual cruelty, the sheer catastrophic incompetence of it all crashed down on her. The documents weren't just paper. They were the legacy of her father, the future of her company, the work of thousands of her people. And they had been thrown away like garbage because the staff had already decided she was a worthless crank. She stumbled back from the desk, her face pale. She returned to the elevator, her usual iron composure completely shattered. The other guests saw an odd, distressed woman and averted their eyes. Upstairs in the silent suite, she collapsed into a chair, the full weight of the disaster settling upon her. She was ruined. The deal was dead. And it had all been undone by a cheap, ugly prejudice she had been too proud or too tired to fight. Meanwhile, in the hotel's vast, chaotic mailroom in the basement, Chloe Washington was on her break. She often ate her lunch there, amidst the carts of luggage and stacks of packages, just for the peace and quiet. As she ate her sandwich, her eyes fell upon a bin in the corner, labelled "Damaged for Disposal." On top of a pile of discarded boxes was a plain cardboard mailer with international shipping labels. Its corner was slightly crushed, and a fine dark brown dust had leaked from the seam, a dust that smelled distinctly earthy and fragrant. It smelled like high-quality oolong tea. But what caught Chloe's eye was the recipient's information printed in bold letters, Lynn M. Imperial Suite. It was her package. The one Isabel had claimed was disposed of. It hadn't been disposed of at all. It had been carelessly, negligently tossed into a bin to be forgotten. Chloe's heart started to hammer against her ribs. She looked at the package, then thought of the distressed woman upstairs. She thought of the high-stakes Mandarin she had overheard, the logo of Phoenix Dynamic, and the sneering condescension of the staff. This wasn't just a misplaced package. This was the tipping point. In that moment, Chloe made a decision. She was tired of being silent. She was tired of being invisible. She carefully lifted the package from the bin, tucked it under her arm, and walked towards the service elevator. She was just a maid, and what she was about to do could get her fired in an instant. But it was the right thing to do, and she had a feeling it was about to change everything. The elevator ride to the penthouse floor was the longest of Chloe's life. The package felt heavy in her hands, not with its physical weight, but with the weight of its significance. She was crossing a line, breaking the unspoken rule of her job to be unseen and unheard. Her mind raced. What would she say? How would she explain this? One wrong move, and she'd be out on the street, her much-needed job gone. She reached the door of the Imperial Suite and hesitated, her knuckles hovering over the wood. She could still turn back, drop the package at the front desk and pretend she was never involved. But the image of Mrs. Lynn's distressed face in the lobby, the memory of her powerful voice on the phone, pushed Chloe forward. She took a deep breath and knocked softly. There was no answer. She knocked again, a little louder this time. The door opened a crack. Mrs. Lynn stood there, a shadow of the formidable woman Chloe had glimpsed. Her face was ashen, her eyes hollow with defeat. She looked at Chloe's uniform, and her expression barely changed, assuming it was more turn-down service or another hotel-related problem. "Go away," she said, her voice thick with despair. "Leave me." She began to close the door, but Chloe spoke quickly, holding up the package. "Mrs. Lynn, wait." Mrs. Lynn paused, her eyes falling on the cardboard mailer. A flicker of disbelief, then a tidal wave of emotion washed over her face. She snatched the package from Chloe's hands, tearing it open with trembling fingers. She ignored the broken tin of tea, her hands searching until they pulled out a thick, securely bound folio of documents. She clutched it to her chest, her eyes squeezed shut in overwhelming relief. She looked up at Chloe, her gaze sharp and questioning. "Where?" she asked in her halting English. "They said, disposed. Thrown away." This was the moment. Chloe's throat was dry. She could give a simple answer in English retreat, back into her role as the silent maid, and disappear. Or she could take the leap. She met Mrs. Lynn's gaze directly, her posture shifting from that of a deferential employee to that of an equal. She took a steadying breath and spoke, her voice clear and calm in flawless formal Mandarin. "Lin tai tai tamen batareng zaile dixiashi, de la jixiangli. Tamen shuo yo kei defen mo dan voxiang, na se shi nindesha. Wo hien bao kian, tamen rusai bu jing, de duidai nande upin." Translation: Mrs. Lynn, they threw it in a disposal bin in the basement. They said there was a suspicious powder, but I suspected it was just your tea. I am very sorry for the disrespect they showed your property. The world seemed to stop. The silence that filled the opulent suite was absolute. It was more profound than the absence of noise. It was the sound of a paradigm shattering. Mrs. Lin stood completely still, the documents clutched in her hand, her face a mask of utter shock. Her eyes, which had been dull with despair, were now wide-boring into Chloe with an intensity that was almost physical. She had spent days in this hotel being treated as a caricature, a stupid, difficult, incomprehensible foreigner. She had built a fortress around herself, using her broken English as both a shield and a smokescreen. And now the maid, the lowest-ranking, most invisible person on the staff, had just spoken to her in her own language, with a precision and respect that she hadn't encountered since she'd landed in this country. She hadn't just spoken the language, she had understood the situation, identified the disrespect, and apologized for it on their behalf. Slowly, as if moving through water, Mrs. Lin lowered the folio of documents onto a nearby table. She looked at Chloe, truly seeing her for the first time. She saw not a uniform, but the intelligent, compassionate young woman wearing it. The dam of her tightly controlled composure finally broke. The exhaustion, the frustration, the loneliness of the past few days washed over her. Still speaking in Mandarin, her voice, now laced with a weary vulnerability, was barely a whisper. "You speak my language." Chloe nodded, her own heart pounding. "Yes, Mrs. Lin, I studied in Beijing." "Here," Mrs. Lin said, her voice cracking slightly. "In this place, I did not think anyone understood anything." "They don't judge what they don't understand," Chloe replied softly, the Mandarin words flowing naturally, "and they chose not to understand you." In that moment, the dynamic between them was irrevocably transformed. They were no longer a guest and a maid, a millionaire and a worker. They were two women, an ocean away from everything familiar, who had found a moment of perfect unexpected connection in a shared language. The air in the room was charged with possibility. The revelation had occurred, and the consequences were about to ripple outwards, shaking the very foundations of the Grand Majestic. The tension in the suite evaporated, replaced by an atmosphere of surreal calm. Mrs. Lin gestured towards one of the plush armchairs. "Please," she said in Mandarin. "Sit." It was not a request, it was a gentle command. Chloe, feeling as though she had stepped into an alternate reality, sat down. Mrs. Lin prepared tea, her movements now graceful and assured. She didn't use the hotel's subpar equipment, but instead produced a small, elegant travel set from her luggage, including a proper yixing pot. She handled the leaves from the broken tin with reverence. The aroma that filled the room was rich and complex. As she poured the tea, she began to talk. The words flowed out of her, a torrent of frustration and strategy that had been dammed up for days. She spoke of the arrogance of the sellers of kinetic dynamics, of their attempts to change the terms of the deal at the last minute. She spoke of the political pressures from both Washington and Beijing. She spoke of the immense weight of responsibility she carried for her 80,000 employees. Chloe listened captivated. This was a real-world lesson, more profound than anything she had learned in a classroom. She didn't just listen, she understood. When Mrs. Lin mentioned a specific sticking point in the contract regarding intellectual property transfer, Chloe was able to follow. "They are fighting you on the patent for the Atlas neural network, aren't they?" Chloe asked quietly. "It's their most valuable asset, but it's useless without your company's deep learning integration." Mrs. Lin stopped pouring, her hand hovering in midair. She stared at Chloe, her expression one of renewed astonishment. "How could you possibly know that Phoenix Dynamics' acquisition strategy is legendary?" Chloe explained. "You don't just buy companies, you buy keystone technologies and absorb them into your larger ecosystem. The Atlas patent is the only reason to buy a company with as much debt as Kinetic Dynamics. I wrote my master's thesis on your company's global expansion model." A slow, genuine smile spread across Mrs. Lin's face for the first time. It transformed her severe features, revealing a warmth and humor that had been hidden beneath layers of stress. "A maid," she mused in Mandarin, shaking her head in wonder. "I am surrounded by overpaid bankers and lawyers who barely grasp the nuance of this deal, and the one person in this entire city who truly understands my strategy is a maid at this ridiculous hotel." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp with purpose. "Tell me your story, Chloe Washington. Why are you here folding towels when you should be in a boardroom?" So Chloe told her. She spoke of her passion for the language and culture, her studies, her ambitions, and then the crushing reality of her mother's illness and the medical bills that had derailed her life. She spoke without self-pity, stating the facts of her situation, with a quiet dignity that impressed Mrs. Lin far more than any tale of triumph would have. As she finished, Mrs. Lin sat back, her gaze thoughtful. "In my country," she said softly, "there is a concept called Yuan Fen. It is the idea of a binding force, a fate that brings certain people together. It is not an accident that you were here at this time. It is not an accident that you found that package." Before Chloe could process the weight of that statement, there was a sharp, peremptory knock at the door. Without waiting for an answer, the door swung open and Mr. Sterling strode in. His face was a thundercloud of fury. He had been told by Isabel that the maid Chloe had gone up to the imperial suite and hadn't come down for nearly an hour. It was a gross breach of protocol. He saw the scene before him, the problem guest sitting comfortably in an armchair, having tea with one of his maids. To him it was a picture of utter chaos, a breakdown of the rigid hierarchy upon which his world was built. "Washington," he barked, his voice cracking like a whip. "What is the meaning of this? You are fraternizing with a guest. You are to be working, not taking a tea break. Your shift ended 20 minutes ago. Get out." Chloe stood up, her cheeks flushing. But before she could say a word, Mrs. Lin rose to her feet. She placed a calming hand on Chloe's arm and turned to face Mr. Sterling. The weary, confused woman he had threatened hours earlier was gone. In her place stood a queen. When she spoke, her English was still accented, but it was no longer broken. It was precise, deliberate, and lethally cold. "This young woman is here at my invitation." Mrs. Lin stated, her voice dangerously quiet. "She is my guest. You, however, are not." Sterling was taken aback by the sudden shift in her command of the language, but he recovered quickly, his arrogance overriding his surprise. "That is irrelevant. She is my employee, and she is on the clock in my hotel," he sneered. "And you, madam, are on very thin ice. I warned you about causing disruptions. This is the final straw. I want you both out. Now." He reached out and grabbed Chloe's arm, intending to physically escort her from the room. "Do not touch her," Mrs. Lin commanded. The words were not loud, but they carried an authority that made Sterling's hand freeze. It was at that exact tension-filled moment that the suite's doorbell chimed. Mr. Sterling, flustered and angry, stormed over and threw the door open. "What is it now?" he snapped. Standing in the hallway were two men in immaculate bespoke suits. The younger man in the lead, a sharp-eyed man in his early 40s, looked at Sterling with open surprise. "We're here for the 9:00 a.m. meeting with Madam Lin," he said. "I'm Robert Blackwood, Executive VP of Kinetic Dynamics." He gestured to the distinguished silver-haired man beside him. "And this is my father, Harrison Blackwood." Mr. Sterling's blood ran cold. He felt the floor drop out from beneath him. Harrison Blackwood, the patriarch, the legendary semi-retired founder of Kinetic Dynamics, and more importantly, the majority shareholder and owner of the entire five-star hotel conglomerate that included the Grand Majestic. He owned the hotel, and he was here to meet with the woman Sterling was in the process of throwing out onto the street. The air in the Imperial Suite crackled, suddenly charged with a silence so profound it felt like a physical force. Harrison Blackwood, a man whose quiet presence commanded more authority than a drill sergeant's shout, took in the scene with a placid, analytical gaze that missed nothing. He saw the furious, florid face of his hotel manager, whose hand was still clamped around the arm of a terrified-looking maid. He saw the composed, icy demeanor of the foreign businesswoman. He was there to meet a woman who seemed entirely unintimidated. And he saw the entire tableau for what it was, a disaster of his own employees' making. Robert Blackwood, his son and the acting CEO, was the first to break the silence, his voice sharp with the annoyance of a busy man whose schedule had just been derailed. "Sterling, what on earth is going on here? You're interrupting a private and highly confidential meeting." The mention of his name seemed to break a spell. Mr. Sterling let go of Chloe's arm as if it were a hot coal, snatching his hand back. The blood drained from his face, leaving a ghastly, waxy pallor. His mind, usually a well-oiled machine of obsequious calculations, was now a frantic mess of spinning gears grinding to a halt. He could see his career, his reputation, his entire carefully constructed world dissolving before his very eyes. Harrison Blackwood was not just the owner, he was a legend, a titan of industry, known for his intolerance of incompetence. Sterling's well-practiced civility kicked into a desperate, high-pitched overdrive. "Mr. Blackwood, sir. My deepest, most sincere apologies. This is an unexpected, an unforeseen internal staffing issue. I was just in the process of resolving it." He shot a venomous, panicked glare at Chloe, silently willing her to disappear, then turned, a simpering, grotesque smile on Mrs. Lynn. "Madam Lynn, a pleasure to finally meet you in person. I am Richard Sterling, the general manager. I trust my staff has made your stay truly exceptional." The sheer breathtaking hypocrisy of the question hung in the air thick and suffocating. It was a lie so audacious, so contrary to the visible evidence, that it was almost a work of art. Mrs. Lynn didn't even grant him a glance. Her eyes, sharp and clear, were fixed on Harrison Blackwood. She gave a slight respectful bow of her head, an acknowledgement between equals. Then she turned her gaze to Chloe, and in that look she transferred the power of the entire room onto the young woman's shoulders. "Miss Washington." She said, her voice clear and carrying her English, now imbued with a chilling precision. "Would you please be so kind as to explain to Mr. Blackwood and his son the quality of the exceptional service I have received at this establishment? It was a test, a coronation and a command all in one." Chloe felt a tremor of fear, but it was quickly eclipsed by a surge of adrenaline. This was the moment. All eyes in the room, the confused gaze of Robert Blackwood, the analytical stare of his father, and the supportive, expectant look from Mrs. Lynn were on her. She was no longer a maid. She was a witness. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and met Harrison. Blackwood's intimidating gaze without flinching. Her voice, when she spoke, was not emotional or accusatory. It was steady, professional, and devastatingly factual. "Mr. Blackwood," she began. "With all due respect to Mr. Sterling, Madam Lynn's stay has been anything but exceptional. From the moment of her arrival, she has been treated not as a valued guest, but as a problem to be managed. This treatment, orchestrated and encouraged by Mr. Sterling himself, has been one of systematic disrespect and condescension. Chloe laid out the facts, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. Her specific requests, which were culturally significant and essential for her peace of mind during a high-stress period, were mocked by the staff and ignored. A critical international video conference was sabotaged when a request for technical assistance was deliberately delayed for hours. And earlier today, Mr. Sterling personally entered this suite to threaten Madame Lynn with eviction, accusing her of being a disruption to the hotel. She paused, letting the weight of those failures settle in the room before delivering the final crushing blow. Furthermore, she continued, her voice unwavering, a critical time-sensitive package for Madame Lynn containing the foundational documents for your 9 o'clock meeting was delivered to the hotel this morning. Despite its importance, it was deemed suspicious by the front desk. It was never delivered. Instead, it was carelessly thrown into a disposal bin in the basement to be discarded with the trash. I found it there by chance, less than an hour ago. Had I not your meeting today, and the multi-billion-dollar deal it represents would have been impossible. Harrison Blackwood's placid expression had slowly hardened into granite. He turned his cool grey eyes on Sterling, who was now visibly trembling. "Richard," Mr. Blackwood said, his voice dangerously soft, a quiet rumble that promised a storm. "Is this an accurate account of events?" "Sir, it's a gross exaggeration, a misunderstanding," Sterling sputtered, grasping at straws. The woman, the guest, she was being incredibly difficult. Her package was damaged. There was a strange powder leaking from it. It was a security protocol. "The strange powder," Chloe interjected, her voice cutting through his panicked excuses with surgical precision, was high-grade Da Hong Pao oolong tea, something a general manager of a 5-star hotel and establishment that prides itself on global sophistication should arguably be able to recognize. That single factual statement sealed Sterling's fate. Robert Blackwood looked from the stammering, pathetic manager to the articulate, preternaturally calm Maid, and then to the silent, powerful Madame Lynn. The picture was brutally embarrassingly clear. They hadn't just been inhospitable. They had nearly scuttled a monumental business deal through sheer ugly prejudice. Harrison Blackwood took a single deliberate step forward. "Richard, your employment at this hotel, and within my entire global conglomerate, is terminated. Effective immediately. Do not speak to anyone. Do not return to your office. Security will escort you from the premises. Send an invoice for your personal effects to my corporate headquarters. I will deal with it myself." There was no appeal. The words were delivered with the finality of a judge's sentence. Sterling's face crumpled, the bluster and arrogance vanishing to reveal the terrified hollow man beneath. He opened his mouth, then closed it, a fish gasping for air. Stripped of his title and his authority in less than 5 minutes, he turned and stumbled out of the room, a ghost leaving the scene of his own professional death. An uncomfortable silence followed his departure. Harrison Blackwood then turned to Mrs. Lynn, his expression one of deep professional regret. "Madame Lynn, on behalf of my entire organization, I offer my most sincere and profound apologies. There is no excuse for the treatment you have received. It is a failure of the highest order." Mrs. Lynn gave a slight magnanimous nod. "The failure was of one man, Mr. Blackwood, not the entire organization. You have dealt with him. The matter is closed. Apology accepted. Now shall we discuss the acquisition of your company." The breathtaking shift back to business was a power move of its own, and it clearly impressed both Blackwoods. As they moved towards the seating area, Mrs. Lynn paused and placed a light hand on Chloe's arm. "Our discussion will involve complex technical and financial details," she said to the men. And there will be nuances that are best expressed in my own language. Miss Washington will be joining us." Chloe froze her mind, struggling to keep up. Robert Blackwood looked at her, his expression a mixture of surprise and dawning respect. "She is your translator." "No," Mrs. Lynn corrected him, a faint knowing smile playing on her lips. "She is my new advisor. Her insight has already proven to be invaluable." And so Chloe Washington, still dressed in her simple grey maid's uniform, took a seat at the table with 3 titans of the global tech industry. The hours that followed were a blur of intense negotiation. But Chloe was more than a passive observer. When Robert Blackwood used an American sports idiom about hitting a grand slam, and Mrs. Lynn looked momentarily confused, Chloe smoothly interjected in Mandarin, "He means we must achieve a level of success that is absolute and removes all doubt." When Mrs. Lynn used a specific Mandarin technical term for a predictive algorithm architecture, Chloe provided the precise English equivalent for the Blackwoods, even adding a brief, insightful comment about how it differed from their own Atlas system, a detail she remembered from her thesis. She was not just a conduit, she was a catalyst, a cultural and intellectual bridge that smoothed the path to a deal. By late afternoon, the framework of a historic agreement was in place. As the Blackwoods left, shaking both women's hands with genuine admiration, Mrs. Lynn turned to Chloe in the quiet of the suite. The city lights were beginning to glitter in the twilight outside the vast windows. "You have a choice, Chloe Washington," she said, her tone gentle but serious. "You can accept my gratitude. I will pay off every cent of your mother's medical debt and provide a fund for her future care. Your life will be unburdened, and you will be free to pursue your original path. I will owe you a debt I can never truly repay." She paused, her eyes searching Chloe's, assessing her. "Or you can accept my offer. Come work for me. Not as a translator, not as an assistant, but as my chief of staff for Western operations. You will be my bridge, my eyes, and my ears in this hemisphere. Your mother will receive treatment from the best doctors in the world at my personal expense for as long as she needs it. Your salary will be enough to ensure your family's security for generations. The work will be harder than anything you have ever imagined. The pressure will be immense. But you will have a seat at the table where the future is being made." Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, not of sadness or fear, but of an overwhelming, unbelievable sense of destiny. The path that had been cruelly blocked had not just reappeared, it had transformed into a superhighway. This was more than a job. It was the life she was meant to live. Her answer was immediate, choked with emotion, but firm in its unshakable resolve. "When do I start?" And so, a story that began with prejudice and misunderstanding ended with a powerful new beginning. It's a powerful reminder that we never truly know the battles people are fighting, or the incredible potential hidden just beneath the surface. Mrs. Lynn wasn't a crazy woman. She was a titan under pressure. Chloe wasn't just a maid. She was a brilliant mind waiting for her moment. Their story shows us that true strength isn't in judging others, but in having the courage to understand them. It teaches us that empathy is a superpower, and the person you underestimate today might just be the one who changes your life tomorrow. What do you think? Have you ever witnessed a situation where someone was completely misjudged? Let me know your stories in the comments below. If this story moved you, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and be sure to subscribe for more true life stories that reveal the incredible secrets hidden in our everyday lives.